What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? Viewers Edition. That's right, time for more stories from your comments. Story 1. This didn't happen to me, but it's a story my mother has told me. In 2000, she lived in this small house with her friend. When they bought it, their landlord told them to stay out of the basement. My mom never went in, but she did peek down the staircase only to see a few boxes. A few weeks after they moved in, my mom's cat went missing, and they never found out what happened to it. But after that occurrence, this photo that she had of her cat on a shelf kept on ending up across the room in front of the door for no apparent reason. The longer they lived there, the more weird stuff happened. At night, my mom and her friend would hear noises like rustling, clanging, and in one case vacuuming, and thinking it was each other. They would also smell strange things like cooking potatoes. In December, Mom and her friend discovered their front door spread across the floor, the pins for it completely missing. They told the landlord about this, and he said that someone was pranking them. He appointed his dog to guard the house, but eventually took her back. Later that month, Mom's friend went away for the holidays, and my mom's boyfriend was staying with her. One night, all of the events culminated. My mom was in her room while her boyfriend showered. Her radio suddenly turned on, a man slowly talking through loud static. My mom saw the radio was not on, so she turned it on and then off, stopping the noise. After her boyfriend got out of the shower, he and my mom had frozen pizza and watched TV. My mom had used a knife to cut the pizza, leaving it dirty on the counter. While my mom and her boyfriend were watching TV, the cord for it randomly jumped up twice, then fell out of the wall. Neither my mom nor her boyfriend could figure out what made this happen, and they eventually went to bed. But late that night, they woke up to hear a ruckus coming from the kitchen, louder than any of the noises that had occurred. It sounded like someone banging around kitchen items like pots and pans. As soon as the boyfriend asked my mom what that was, the noise stopped. They both went downstairs, but there was no evidence that anything had happened. That was until they realized that above them was the same knife my mom had used to cut the frozen pizza, stuck into the roof and completely clean. After that, nothing else happened, and my mom eventually moved out, but she has a few theories. A, it was the landlord for whatever reason tormenting the inhabitants of the house. This doesn't explain the radio or cord incident, but he was the only person with access to the house. B, it was some crazy guy playing a prank on them, as the landlord suggested, which doesn't really make any sense since they wouldn't have access to the house. C, it was a ghost or some supernatural force, which kind of has some supporting evidence. This kind of aligns with what happened with the cat, since maybe the spirit or whatever was trying to tell them that the cat was dead by putting the picture in an obvious place. Also, my mom telling her coworkers about what had happened the one night with her boyfriend. One of the coworkers said that the house she was living in was built in the 1920s when a lot of people from the Appalachian part of the U.S. were coming to southern Illinois where I live. He said that is an Appalachian tradition to never leave a dirty knife out, and that they like to stick knives into roofs when they were finished using them, which explains the knife incident. So if it really is a ghost, I would think it's a ghost of someone from Appalachia. So that's the story of the very strange house my mom lived in. That story was full of twists and turns, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I'm leaning toward landlord trickery, though, that definitely leaves a huge hole in the story as to why. See, this is why we all need the Scooby-Doo gang to come check these things out. They would have caught that ghost, pulled off the mask, and been like, "The landlord?" And then, by rules of the show, he would have had to fill in the gaps that Velma and Fred didn't figure out. Assuming that franchise isn't ruined forever. Thanks, HBO. Story 2. A pretty scary thing that didn't happen to me, but a family member, was when my grandma got a stalker. She lives right next to an old woman with mental problems, and she can be heard screaming and yelling throughout the night. She sometimes even throws things over the fence onto my grandma's property. This included stuffed toys, glass bottles, and food. One day, my grandma went over to the old lady's house to talk to her, and the lady had a friend over. This friend was a dirty old hobo-looking man with a big beard. My grandma talked to both of them about something, and then a few days later, she started getting creepy love letters. She never spoke of it at first, but after the letters kept coming, she called my mom and uncle. My grandma ended up finding out who sent the letters because the old dude would wait till my grandma left the house, and he would talk to her for as long as she was around him. When my mom and uncle arrived at my grandma's house, my uncle was just about ready to beat the crap out of the old dude. They both went over to confront them, and I think after a good stern talking to and maybe a threat or two, the old guy and the lady stopped bothering my grandma. Story 3. So I don't remember this, but my parents kind of hang it over my head as the time you saw something weird. So back when I was 3 to 4, we were spending Thanksgiving at my granduncle's house, and while we were sitting down for dinner, I just started wailing. My parents had no clue why I was crying, but then I said that there was this little girl in the window just staring at me. It got so bad my dad and older cousins got up and moved an entire couch to block the window. So dinner concludes and my dad gets a little tipsy and my mom has no clue how to drive stick, so we all settle in for the night in a few guest rooms. Next morning, I get up and say that Ashley, the girl outside, is really nice and I played some games with her. What adds a cherry on top is that my dad had a sister who was stillborn. Her name would have been, you guessed it, Ashley. To no one's surprise, I now have an obsession with the paranormal. Well, hot damn. Fans of the channel know I'm a skeptic through and through, but I do love hearing evidence that challenges my beliefs. This is definitely pretty darn eerie, and I don't really have a perfect explanation for it. I mean, it's a common enough name, and kids that age have wild imagination and aren't the most reliable, but even so, that doesn't feel like the most satisfying answer, even as I say it. Story 4. My story is just a nightmare and a weird one to be scared of, but I still think that it was pretty creepy. I was playing a video game. The first 2 levels are kind of fuzzy, but the 3rd level was walking down a bendy-style hallway. There were 2 doors, one of which led back to the beginning of the hallway, one of which I really didn't want to go through. Eventually, I went in the room I didn't want to go into. There was a TV in it. At first, it was just a white screen with static noise, but then it went to a pink teddy bear with glowing white eyes and a bloody knife saying, "Shh." I realized I was dreaming and tried to open my eyes. I almost got them open, but it was like there were rocks on them. The teddy bear looked kind of mad and again said, "Shh." The second time I tried, I opened my eyes. The most terrifying nightmare ever is that one with a pink teddy bear as the monster. That's gotta mean something. Story 5. One time I woke up and saw a string of Starlink satellites in the sky, and I legitimately thought there was a UFO outside of my house. I was so terrified I started screaming and grabbed a gun thinking there were actual extraterrestrials outside. Well, when my girlfriend came to see what was happening, they were gone and we looked it up and found out they were just Starlink satellites. I felt pretty stupid to say the least. Story 6. A scary thing happened to me once when I was 11. I had a sleepover with my friend and she started to randomly cry in my room. I got really worried and started to try to calm her down and ask what was wrong. She said this, "Do you see it in the corner?" I looked around and saw nothing, so I asked her what she was seeing and gave me a lightly detailed description of a shadowy disfigured thing that was watching her. I took her out of the room and got her to calm down. It took a while, and then I got my parents. We called her parents and she went home. She stayed out of school for a while and then she texted me saying she was going to switch schools without reasoning. I don't know what happened and how she saw it, but I am suspecting that she had a mental illness like schizophrenia. Yeah, sadly that does sound like someone dealing with some pretty difficult mental issues, and hopefully she was able to get some help. Or maybe it was just stress or imagination and the moving was coincidental. I guess we'll never know, but we can certainly hope the best for her. Story 7. Tied for me. Both were nightmares I had as a kid. Let's get the simple one out of the way first. For weeks, I would occasionally have really strange nightmares where I was just sitting on my bed with this horrifying, oppressive things, more like a presence than a creature weighing down on me. Not literally, but it just felt like a huge weight on my chest, and it was really scary. I didn't know how to describe it back then. Now I do. Sleep paralysis. Now, on to the more interesting one. I was in 3rd grade, I think, so 9 years old? Somewhere around then. Context, my bed was in one corner of my room, my door was to my left, and in the far left corner from my bed was my closet door. So in the middle of the night, I hear a rumbling from my closet. I have no idea what it sounded like, but it felt like some kind of scary shadow monster making the earth tremble. So I get up, grab the knob to my closet door, and I woke up. We're cool, but then I hear the rumbling again, and I go to the door again, and I wake up again. Very confused by this point, we repeat this cycle no less than 6 times. Eventually, I wake up, and instantly, I can tell I'm really awake. Apparently, it's either innately obvious what is reality and what is a dream, or I was just very conscious of what waking up to another dream felt like. Keep in mind, I'm freaking out at this point. This is the kid who slept under all their covers in case zombies tried to get they'd be safe. This is the kid who watched his closet door slowly creak open over the course of 2 hours. The kid who had nightmares from watching the trailer for The Thing. And somehow this absolute coward acts like so. I hear the rumbling from my closet once and for the last time. I think to myself, this is real. I won't wake up this time. And despite apparently thinking this was the work of a monster, I steel my resolve and open the door to witness the horror that was my cat rustling around in a container of Beyblades. Yes, I was given 6 consecutive dream loops that seemed like prophetic visions at the time by my cat. I still have no idea how he got into my closet because I know for sure I kept that thing closed at night as a kid. Still kind of disturbs me to this day. Not the dreams, the reality, the fact that I just decided that I would be extremely brave by my standards for no particular reason. It's extremely strange to me. The wake up fake out 6 times. That has to be a friggin' record. Your brain was trying so hard to wake you up for real, but it just kept missing the target. And it's so weird how in the dream you wake up and it's like, yep, I'm definitely awake. But when you actually wake up for real, you're just like, how did I ever think I was awake before? Actually waking up feels way different. Honestly, if I'd gone into science, studying the dreaming mind would probably have been the area I focused on. Story 8. So, one day when I was about 7 to 10 years old, I'm just chilling in my room looking at my phone. Mind you, my mom was at work at the time. She was a doctor and I was being babysat by my grandma. So I'm just chilling in my room looking at random memes on my phone when I suddenly get a message from an unknown number on WhatsApp. This happened in the early 2010s. The message said, "Hello, what's your name?" I had luckily been taught by my mom from an early age to never trust strangers, especially on the internet. So instead of telling them my name, I asked, "Who are you?" They answered with, "I'm your friend. What's your name?" Now, I was just a naive 7 and 10-year-old kid at the time, but even to me at the time, these messages sounded sus as hell. So I decided to talk to my grandma about it. I can still see today how her face went pale and she looked at the messages. She told me, "Don't answer those messages no matter what," then proceeded to call my mom. 5 minutes later, my mom was at home. They took my phone and started analyzing it like it was the last piece of evidence on a case that had remained unsolved for years. The next day, she went to the police station. While we were waiting at the police station, the dude started sending me pics. The pics themselves didn't have anything of sus in them. It was just him having fun at a beach. After talking to the police chief, my mom got an idea. She asked me to leave the room, so I did. I later learned that she made a phone call with the dude for the police to track him down, so she pointed my phone screen upward in a way that she could see him, but he couldn't see her. I also learned later that while acting and speaking like a child for the dude started doing some very adult things on the screen. Eventually, they managed to track him down to a place in Saudi Arabia. I live in Brazil. They warned the Saudi Arabia authorities and they arrested the dude. Turns out he was a pedophile. A few days later, everything had come back to normal. I had already put that behind me, but suddenly I hear angry shouting from the kitchen. Curious, I leave my room and go to the kitchen, and what do I see? My mom is on the phone with the dude. Just to put even more salt on the wound, he had already been sentenced to a lifetime in prison. My mom called him via phone to talk to him. And there she was, calling him every single curse word that you can possibly imagine, and even some that you can't. After calling him about 80 different things, none of them good, she just hung up on his face. This was the scariest thing that ever happened to me, but it also made me realize how lucky I am to have a mother such as her. Your mom, Chris Hansen'd that dude, and that's freaking awesome. Also just reinforces my belief that the internet is no place for kids, at least not until you tell them just how friggin' awful the world can be. What an absolute creep. I'm glad you went to your grandma and mom for help and avoided any danger. Parents, make sure your kids know they can come to you with anything bad like that and that they will not get in trouble for doing so. Story 9. Oh, I've got a story. A couple years ago now, I had to have eye surgery. The creepy part of this story is I remember the moments leading up to when I completely blacked out. First, my hearing started getting muffled, then it looked like my eyes were closing, but it didn't feel like my eyes were closing, if that makes any sense. Then a box appeared in my vision. It looked like somebody had quickly sketched it with a white color pencil. Then it started rotating and getting closer to one of the corners, like zooming in. Then a very small hole appeared and got bigger and bigger, and I seemed to zoom through it. This went on for about 30 seconds, and after that, I don't remember anything. Keep in mind, I could still hear, talk, and realize what was going on. I didn't tell the doctors what I was seeing at the time and ended up telling my mother about 2 months later. Story 10. I remember one thing specifically. I was with a friend a couple of years ago. We were 12 years old at the time, and would hang out in some park waiting for another friend. While waiting, a white van with no windows was going in circles around the park, and eventually a man came out and came to the park's door talking to us. The park was still under construction, and we had climbed to get in. He would ask us what our names were, what we were doing, and in general personal questions. We ignored him for a while, but he wouldn't leave. My friend then called me and said, "Let's leave," because we were creeped out. So I called the friend, and we were waiting and told him what had happened, so he suggested meeting at my house. So when he looked away and went in his van for unknown reasons, we started climbing the fence and started running. 2 to 3 weeks later, we found out that he had stolen that van and confessed he was trying to kidnap for money. Story 11. Things you should know before this story. My entire neighborhood is built on a Native American burial ground. Many people in my neighborhood have had seemingly paranormal experiences. So this happened about a week ago. I was home alone, as I always am for the first 3 to 4 hours after school, and was talking to my friend over the phone. After maybe 1.5 hours, we were talking about random crap, as always, when I heard what seemed like 2 entirely distinguishable voices talking, neither of which was speaking any English. I, being the dumb butt I am, say to my friend, "Hey, I'll be right back. I think somebody is in my house." I muted, opened my door, walked to the edge of the staircase, and yell, "Hello? If there's somebody in this house and they don't live here, I'm going to ask you to leave or I will call the cops," instead of doing so from the safety underneath the cramped area under my bed. Heard nothing until 5 seconds later when I heard the sound of my phone hanging up. I walked back in to check. The internet was out. I went downstairs, reset it, nothing. Unplugged and plugged it back in, nothing. Almost as if I had turned off my internet connection. At this point, I'm convinced somebody is in the house. I searched the entire thing top to bottom. Not a single thing had been moved, broken, or out of place. My mom got home and the internet is working for her. Slowly, the internet on my phone is returning. I tell my barber what happened a couple days later, and she tells me about the neighborhood being built on a Native American burial ground. I have a feeling that the people talking weren't quite, alive. Honestly, I would be significantly more worried about home invaders than anything supernatural. That crap terrifies me, and I wouldn't recommend confronting them like that. Stay safe. And if it was something supernatural, I'm also not sure I would confront them, especially when the ghosts have the moral high ground, because I feel like, at least in a story, that gives the ghosts the right to enact vengeance. Story 12. A few years ago, I developed a horrible fear of thunderstorms and tornadoes after watching really strong straight-line winds come at our house from the woods through a window, and it didn't help that my mom freaked out over it when it happened, too. I spent a long time being so scared whenever it rained that I would go to my parents' closet, the safest place in the house in case of a tornado, and sit in there for hours to wait out the weather, including in the middle of the night when I was most scared because if we got any kind of horrible weather, I would be the only one awake, and my parents didn't care to listen to tornado warnings when there was actually a tornado in the area. One night I got scared, so I went to their closet. It was really late, and they were already asleep, and the dogs were used to it at that point, so they didn't even so much as growl at me entering the room. I went into the closet, got situated, and everything was quiet. My parents are both relatively heavy sleepers, and my mom even wears earplugs so that there's no chance of the dogs potentially waking her up if they decide to bark. A little while after I sit down there, I hear a voice. It sounds like a woman really close, like on the other side of the door or in front of me, and all it says is, "Hello?" I figure it's just my mom, must have woken her up somehow. Until I realized that if she had woken up and come up to the closet, I would have heard a lot of noise from the bed and her having to move the dogs around to get up. We had 6 smallish dogs at the time who all slept on her side of the bed. And she probably wouldn't have left it at just one little hello. I swore for the rest of the time I was in there, it felt like someone was behind me despite there just being clothes and a wall there. If I remember correctly, I also thought I saw a head with a face hidden by medium-length black hair move next to mine at some point. It terrified me more than the weather that night. Other strange and scary things that happened to me at that house include I would crack my bedroom door open sometimes, and one night I saw the black silhouette of a hairless head duck out of sight when I looked over there. No one in my family is bald. I've had a few occasions where I've seen shadowy arms reaching out toward me from my sides. There was a number of months where I heard knocking on my window and desk randomly in the middle of the night, despite there being no logical reason for it. One night, one of the dogs was sleeping in my bed with me, and I hadn't fallen asleep yet when she suddenly jumped up yelping in pain and ran to my bedroom door, desperately wanting out while staring at my bed. In my opinion, it seemed like something had hit her. I remember cursing out whatever it was while I held her and crying. For at least a month straight, there was this horrible smell of mold in my closet that we couldn't find the source of. Then one day, it just completely vanished without a trace. One day I felt a sudden burning pain on my leg and looked down to see a completely brand new bright red scratch on my calf. It was really 3 scratches right next to each other, and I couldn't figure out any way that could have happened when I was literally just sitting on my bed when it occurred. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.